Hey everybody, it's Mike Murphy with FixUS. Thanks so much for joining us today for this briefing on the results of our recent poll that we did on the topic of patriotism. The purpose of today's briefing is actually twofold. First, we're going to walk through a presentation of the initial findings of this poll we recently did with YouGov on patriotic values, ideals, and history and other topics. But the second purpose, more importantly, is to get your reactions to this. We want to get your input on where we want to take future rounds of research on this topic. And there's going to be multiple ways that you're going to be able to do that during this session, which we'll talk about in a second. But just to reiterate, this is the first of several different publications that we're going to do on these topics. And we're actually in the midst of planning a deeper dive qualitative interview of a sample of Americans to examine these topics. What you're going to see today is just a quantitative poll survey that we did in May, but we want to really dig deeper with interviews from people to understand their underlying beliefs on these topics. So we're going to be doing interviews. So we want to get your ideas on what's worth probing at to really understand in these interviews. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to walk through a presentation, should take about 15, maybe 20 minutes max, of some of the key findings, but we're going to allow you opportunities to engage and give us feedback. My colleague, Ben Tomczyk, who works with me on FixUS, is joining us too. Ben, I'm going to let Ben jump in here. He's going to walk you through the logistics of how you can all provide comment.
Thanks, Mike, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. We really would love to get you involved in the conversation, and as Mike mentioned, there are several ways to do so. The first is at the bottom of your screen, there is a chat feature, so we encourage you to use it. If there are themes throughout the presentation that are resonating or that you think we should dig deeper on, please feel free to include that using the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. I will ask as we go through this to please keep any comments you have civil and oriented towards the presentation. But again, we really want to get you involved. Additionally, if you would like to offer a comment on camera, you can do so by using the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen. If you just click raise hand, at the end of Mike's presentation, we'll then call you and bring you on screen so you can share your feedback. And finally, before Mike gets started, just want to remind everyone that we are recording this webinar. And Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Ben. Okay, I'm going to walk you through some of the key findings and some of our takes on them. Let me step back for a second. Why do we examine the topic of patriotism for this poll? Well, look, if you look in the Webster's Dictionary of what the definition of patriotism is, it means a love or attachment to one's country, right? Now, the topic itself of patriotism and the word itself has been politicized. Many people feel that in recent years. But when you think about that definition, it's a pretty fundamental value. We want to examine in such polarized time, does that still exist? Do we still share an attachment to this country? And if so, why? What are some of the things that may drive that? Because if we can find some answers there, we feel like it could be interesting and insightful for our mission at FixUS, a better understanding and engaging people to address the polarization in our country. So that's what we did. We probed a lot of people on some questions surrounding their levels of patriotism and attachment to the country, and a range of different questions that were intended to, prod at different hypotheses of what could form that attachment to the country. So let me see if I can start walking through here. So first finding, look, Americans by and large, overwhelmingly, share pride in our country. We asked it in a variety of different ways. We asked if people feel proud to be an American, right? Strong majorities agree or disagree, or strongly agree, that they're proud to be an American. All the slides you're going to see in the presentation today are showing overall level of agreement and distinctions by Democrat, Republican, and Independent, by party affiliation. We are going to be doing future series of publications that examine all sorts of demographic and other characteristic differences amongst respondents, including by age, race, political ideology, and others. What you're going to see here is only by party affiliation. So Americans are proud of our country, right? We ask people on a scale of 1 to 10 whether they generally consider themselves to be patriotic. Over 7 was the average answer. You see some differences amongst parties, but big majorities here are saying that they are patriotic, right? We asked, despite its faults, would you rather live in the United States than in another country? Strong majorities say that they would, right? Much smaller disagreeing with those statements, including majorities of all parties. We also asked a series of questions associated with historical events and achievements and fundamental core American ideals. And what we found on a battery of several different historical events and achievements is Americans share pride in those things, right? So as you see here on this slide, we asked how many it is, 15, 16, 17 different historical events and achievements, and we asked people to rate them on a scale of 1 to 10. As you can see here towards the top, average response on a scale of 1 to 10, passage of the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, was the top rated answer here. This was followed by adopting the Constitution and Bill of Rights, the resolution of the Civil War and outlawing slavery, declaring American independence, and winning World War II. And you can see a variety of other achievements. Nation's response to COVID is far down on that list. But the story here is obviously, look, at a time we know there's big divides and debates over history in this country, there are several historical events and achievements that our poll shows, suggest have strong pride, right, in our country, regardless of party affiliation. We then also asked about core fundamental ideals. We asked people a variety of statements that are typically associated with just core fundamental ideals of what America stands for. And we asked them on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is this ideal to you? And as you can see, a land of liberty, where you work hard, play by the rules, and achieve success for your family, yourself and your family. A country of equality and justice for all. A melting pot, where people of different backgrounds and beliefs come together to make our nation stronger. A land of liberty, where people have freedom and the right to live and worship as they choose. A government of the people, where everyone has a voice in our democracy, and a system of government with limited and separate powers. All these, simple but core fundamental ideals. We asked people on a scale of 1 to 10, how important? As you can see, very, very, very high levels of importance. This is the average answer you're seeing across the parties on a scale of 1 to 10. The mode on these, right, most frequent answer given is a 10, no matter what party affiliation you are on all of these ideals, right? Now, we asked a battery of questions. The survey was designed, they got that question you just saw, and they were followed immediately after with, now on those same set of ideals, how close are we to achieving those ideals on a scale of 1 to 10? Now, as you can see here, what you're seeing on this graph is that first ideal that we polled on, a land of opportunity where you live, if you play by the rules and work hard, you can achieve success and a happy life for yourself and your family. As you can see, small percentages think we've reached that ideal, right? On the right side of the slide here, you're seeing a accumulation of those who answered this to 6 or higher, which is inclusive of the 10s, which we're looking at this as a little bit of saying, on a progress standpoint, right, on a scale of 1 to 10, 6 or higher, that we're kind of more than halfway. Or another way of thinking about it, we've made significant progress, right? As you can see, good majorities of people believe we've made significant progress towards achieving that ideal, but we haven't gotten there yet, right? With some distinctions between Republicans, Democrats, and independents. Same holds when you ask people how close we are to achieving the ideal of a country of inequality and justice for all, right? Very few people think we've reached that ideal, right? And about half, 52%, think we've made enough progress, 6 or higher, right, on this, with, notable distinctions by party. Land of liberty, similar story, but actually higher percentage, right? And over 70% think we're 6 or higher on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of achieving that ideal, with less differences, I think, between parties on that one. And the story held the same on some of those other ideals that we don't have in the deck here, but on a melting pot, on having equal voice in democracy, same story. If you think we've achieved the ideal, we've made good progress, 6 or higher on it. Next battery of questions I'm going to show you here has to do with the concepts of criticizing and working to improve the country as being patriotic. Stepping back for a second, we examined a lot of literature leading up to this poll. There's a lot of literature surrounding patriotism that's looked at aspects of patriotism that relate to critical and blind patriotism being two somewhat distinct types of patriotism. Some academic studies have been done at the school level and from some smaller samples. We wanted to apply some of that research techniques to a broader sample in a survey, which we hadn't seen done before, to get at these distinctions of what people think between critical and blind dimensions of patriotism. They're kind of what they sound like. Critical patriotism means people believe it's patriotic to criticize, critique, and work to improve the country. Blind patriotism is associated with more just blind allegiance to the country, right? That there's nothing wrong with the country, right? That you shouldn't criticize it. Those kind of concepts. Some would say it's kind of associated more with nationalism aspects. Well, what we found, what you see on this slide, is a sample of a bunch of the different statements that are associated with either critical or blind patriotism. And you'll see statements that are associated with more critical patriotism, that the idea of working to critique and improve the country as being a good thing, have strong support. And it doesn't matter by party, as you can see here. If you love America, you should notice its problems and work to correct them. Towards the bottom of the screen, about halfway down, you'll see some that have less support. Those are things that are statements supposedly associated more with a blind patriotism. And you'll see that overall, those have less support amongst Americans overall. Now you'll see here just a few examples here to dig in on that by party. As you can see on this one, if you love America, you should notice its problems and work to correct them. Critical patriotism associated statement. Strong, huge unanimity on that, agree or strongly agree on that conceptually. Now, some of these statements, if you dig beneath the top line, there are noticeable distinctions here. As you can see here, when you ask one of the blind patriotism associated type questions, if you don't love America, wholeheartedly support America, you should live somewhere else. Again, overall, that only had 33%. As you can see here, there's a big delta between the parties here on their level of agreement with that statement. Now, building off of that, some of the other questions we asked got at an interesting aspect where you can see that on the one hand, people say it's okay to criticize the country, but you see some divides when you kind of get at questions that get at people, what they think of the intentions of other people who criticize or protest the country. Now, first, on the good side here, Americans who express their love of the country differently from me are still valued members of society. That had strong levels of support. No differences there, really, amongst the parties. Right? But then here's where some interesting comparisons with previous barrier questions come in here. Right? We asked people who criticize the country do so because they want to make it better. Right? Big differences of opinion here. Only 43% overall, right, agree with that. Agree or strongly agree. The people who criticize the country actually want to do so because they want to make it better. Big differences, as you can see, between the parties, between Democrat, Republican, and Independent, right? And so when you think about that, in contrast to the previous set of questions, where people were saying they agreed, right? People should criticize the country. You can criticize the country. Doing so is patriotic, right? Well, when you ask it in a way that sort of gets at the intentions of other people that are doing so, you see the aspects of distrust, I think, and polarization that we all are seeing in society every day. A different way of getting at it, right? For the most part, people who protest and demonstrate against the U.S. are good, upstanding people, valued members of society. Again, not as strongly supported when you flip it and try to get someone's opinion on other people that are doing critiquing of the country. Okay. Next thing, battery questions to highlight. We asked about certain symbols and rituals, right? We want to get at that sort of aspect of patriotic beliefs. We want to get is this has been associated with they call it symbolic patriotism, the affection that people have for certain symbols and rituals in the country. And the story here is there is some partisan difference, right, on this. That's noticeable in some of the data, right? Overall, we asked about 3 symbols that you're going to see: the flag, the anthem, and the pledge, and they all have the same findings from the survey. It's overall, a good majority of people feel good or very good, right, when they see the American flag flying. But obviously there's some deltas here when you see between the parties, when you look at the good, very good response here versus fine here. And you'll see this in the, I don't have it in this deck, but you can see in our studies on our website, the almost exact same findings hold as it relates to the anthem and the Pledge of Allegiance. And then this last battery here to show is, look, some of the stuff at the front end here of the deck where we're showing that people are patriotic, we share attachment to the country, right? We share pride in some of our historical events, these in our ideals. Well, look, obviously some of the last slides started to get to it, but we had other findings in here that obviously reiterate some of the down feeling and polarized feeling that people have in the country today. First, we asked, do you think American culture and American way of life has mostly changed for the better or worse over the last 60, 70 years, since the 50s? Overall, only 32% believe that it's gotten somewhat or much better, right? Significant majorities overall, including obviously by Republicans and independents, believe somewhat or much worse since the 1950s. How concerned are you about polarization in the country? Well, again, not surprisingly for the people that are on this webinar and follow FixUS, look, people are obviously concerned about the polarization in the country, and that seems to be unifying no matter what party affiliation people have. And then lastly, we asked people, do you feel that politicians listen to people like you? And this is unifying as well, no matter where you are on the political spectrum. Obviously, very few feel that politicians listen to them, people like them. Somewhat more occasionally, but majority overall. And the most frequent answer, no matter party affiliation, is rarely or never that people feel politicians listen to people like them. So with that, then I am going to stop my share here. Good. I made it through in less than 20 minutes. So, okay. I know got through that relatively quick. Sounds like people have been commenting on the chat here. Ben, do we have any emerging or any common themes here of people, what they've been saying here in the chat?
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. I think one of the themes a lot of people are interested in is, could you talk more about the demographics and who we kind of surveyed and the breakdown and political party, where they lay?
So we did this survey with YouGov. YouGov fielded the survey, notable national, or actually international polling firm. And they surveyed a sample of 2,500 Americans. This is overall Americans, right? It's not just registered voters. This is overall Americans. And it's based on a representative sample of Americans, based on all parts of affiliation, right? It's a representative sample by, age, race, gender, party affiliation, ideology, otherwise. And so those are all data that I can share, folks that are interested, and we're going to be sharing the results specifically of the findings by some of those other characteristics later on. What else, Ben?
two questions. One is, what are the actionable takeaways from the data? What are you kind of taking away from it, Mike? And then kind of another one tied to what we found was looking at current events, current American events that people were particularly less proud of in correlation to the other events we surveyed.
Great questions. So I'll give you two answers on the actionable takeaways. One is that we're still trying to figure out the actionable takeaways because we want to dig deeper on the qualitative side to understand some of the drivers here. There are some things that we have hypotheses about, but the actionable ideas surrounding digging deeper on some areas such as those distinctions between, on the one hand, you could be someone saying that it's okay and patriotic to criticize the country, but on the other hand, having questionable intentions of other people that are doing so. We want to qualitatively probe that. We want to qualitatively probe on some of the symbolic patriotism differences of why that's the case. Why people on the one hand, share patriotism in the country, but on the other hand, there's some distinctions here as well. Just get people to articulate it because we feel like if we can bring attention to people's different articulations of those, it can be helpful in bridging differences, right, in polarization. And then third is ultimately what we want to do actionable wise is, as many people know, FixUS is part of and associated with a broader community of organizations that work on bridge building. These are groups that bring people together. That's the actual thing they do. They bring big groups of people together to talk about topics, to as a part of that process, diffuse polarization. And we feel like this topic and this data, we're then going to use it in those sorts of exercises with people to help diffuse polarization.
Thanks, Mike. And before I get to the next theme,
and let me say one more thing because I just saw it pop up. Ultimately, someone asked, "Do we have enough data to suggest messaging on patriotism?" That is another aspect of where we're going to go on an actionable ideas. Once we have further research on the qualitative side here, our intent here is to also translate it into broader messaging and marketing that can be used by anyone that's trying to bring people together. So I just saw that. I wanted to address that.
Before I point out the next theme, I just want to remind everyone that you can comment in the chat feature, and also if you want to be on camera and voice a comment, you can do so using the raise hand feature on the bottom of your screen, and we'll be going to that shortly. One of the themes was how people who may be associated with one party view the other party, and whether there's an understanding of why do they think those that they disagree with may be less patriotic than them.
Yeah, that's obviously a theme here, that people have, as I said, have questionable intentions of why people of the other side. Right? I think we see that in all sorts of data that other groups have done as well. More in Common's done amazing work on this. Part of the perception gap is a big gap, right? Of like what people actually believe, what people perceive the other side to believe, right, on things. And so part of our intent here is to see if we can probe that and tamp down some of those misperceptions too. So that's a really good theme that people are obviously recognizing, and we're going to probe that as well.
Thanks, Mike. Another theme is based on the idea that America is a melting pot, and we come from all over the globe. And since we are made up of so many different cultures and nationalities, does this survey kind of make you think that we're just, instead of coming together, we're just splitting into tribes based off of our diversity?
I mean, I don't know about that. I mean, I'm an optimist, so I take the top line simple findings here from this to counter that. I mean, in other words, like, yeah, obviously we're incredibly divided in the country right now in terms of certain metrics, but I think that when you look at some of the metrics here, that like in terms of just fundamental ideals, our history, look, and we know we're divided over debates over history in this country, and this was admittedly one type of question. There are others, but other groups more in common is seeing this in some of their research too. When you poll people on historical events, there's some pride there. So I think the point is that we can have very differing beliefs. That's what part of makes the democracy great, right? But there are some fundamental ideals here and things that can bring us together. And the question is, how can we elevate that and less of the things that divide us?
Mike, in terms of the respondents, was there a focus on differences between age gaps in generations? And if so, could you dig deeper into that a little bit?
We are going to probe that specifically, and we have the data on it. We did release, in the interest of time, we released the party affiliation first, but we are going to do a series of other releases that probe different other demographic characteristics. So we have that for all this data. I will tell you that by age we have it. There's some interesting findings there that maybe won't surprise people because some of it overlays obviously with the party affiliations, but by and large, older people are more patriotic than younger Americans, right? Younger Americans, I think, feel even less trust in the system these days, right? I think than older Americans. So I think there's some interesting findings there that we're going to elevate as well and engage people around.
Mike, when you were surveying results, somebody asked the question about did you ask about their political engagement, right? So are they writing to their member of Congress, going to a town hall, that sort of thing? Did you do that? And if not, is that an area you'll be digging deeper in moving forward?
We did. We didn't do it in a way, unfortunately. We're going to try and figure out if we can do this in the future analyses, but like in a way that can kind of segment out the, the intensity of people's political activities, and then how that associates, say, with that question on patriotism, sort of a segmentation analysis of that. We haven't been able to do that. We're trying to see if we can do that, but we do have some data on overall that question in isolation about people's political activities, questions about like how often, where they get their news, things like that. We're trying to figure out if we can kind of juxtapose those questions and analyze them against others, which I'm assuming is the intent of what the question or comment was. But that's something we're trying to figure out if we can do in the future too.
Someone just wrote in the chat an interesting observation that when we look at what events historically people are most proud of, none of them are really recent events. A lot of them are, in some cases, over a century old. So what did you make of that? And what do you think that says about us?
That's an interesting observation. It's an interesting observation. And some of it is, look, there wasn't as many in there, I think, to put in. But, I think this is something that has been out there in the public discussions about younger generations, right? Of that there's been, I think there's actually been some polling done on this, that, kind of look back over the last 20 years and some of the events that have taken place in the United States. I think they've had a hard time with attachment to some of these events and being proud of them. So I think that that's an interesting takeaway there that I think is something that, when we do some qualitative stuff and start to probe, particularly by age, right? Or we're kind of getting at people's assessments of how they have pride in the country over their lifetime, right? Over the last 20 years, I think that could be interesting to get at the fact that you're right. Less of them are recent.
Yeah, it's funny as you were talking, a couple people commented in the chat about the various events, and someone said, it's interesting, if you look at, they noticed that the pride in the civil rights movement was just about equal to landing on the moon. And what does that say about us as a country in terms of, where we are? One of the other ideas someone raised is, did we happen to gauge people's thoughts on authoritarianism and patriotism? And are there any themes? Are there any through lines, or that may make us think a little bit deeper about the state of our democracy?
What I would say is nothing explicit in the data you're seeing here on sort of those questions that are like associated with authoritarianism per se, except, right, that obviously there's a lot that's been said when it comes to that battery of questions we did on the sort of critical versus blind patriotism, and some of those blind patriotism types assessments are associated with nationalism, and therefore whether authoritarian leaders are kind of using nationalism to advance their ill intents. And I think that there's some overlap there where I would argue the story is good news, right? Like, it's like, and I get it, like those are, that there are some of those blind patriotism, nationalistic sort of sentiments are low, right? Low levels of agreement, I think is one way to look at that. But it is something that we do want to probe further in some of our qualitative, and we have some other data we're looking at that get at some of the questions around authoritarianism and try to juxtapose them. So thank you for raising that. It's obviously a critical topic these days and something we're going to look at.
Someone just wrote in the chat about who is going to see this data set. Are we sharing it with leadership organizations, members of Congress, the private sector, academia? Who's going to see this, and kind of what do we plan to do with these findings?
Well, the FixUS network overall includes all of those, right, that we just said. We've been distributing it to all those areas, but we also know it's initial. Like, intentionally, I want to phrase initial, because this is just top line. There's a lot we want to dig into here. That's why we're getting your feedback to actually make the most of this. But we are going to, once we have future reports that are meatier, right, on the underlying beliefs driving this from a qualitative standpoint as well, we can really articulate this. Yeah, we are going to engage in extensive outreach beyond those in our network already to many of the different domains and institutional actors that the person just alluded to, certainly academia, policymakers, other communications experts, and our broader network of organizations. Look, that's what FixUS has been about a lot since the beginning, is we have a network of many, many different organizations that are part of us, that are working on all different aspects of trying to bring people together to address the root causes of our polarization. We want to make this data usable for them as well. So we want others to amplify it, and that's what we're going to be doing.
Just a reminder, if you want to voice a comment on screen, you can do so by using the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen. And as you've just seen, it'll pop up for us, and we'll call on you shortly. Mike, someone just put in the chat, and I thought this was such an interesting question. Does the data suggest that the general population is less divided than we are led to believe by the media?
My belief is yes, right? That is my bias. I believe that this data says that. I think a lot of other people's data has said that, look, we got lots of problems in this country. There's no doubt about that. And there's lots of metrics that show, obviously, that we are polarized, right, by certain metrics. But it also shows those metrics, I believe, don't tell the whole story, right? That, like, there are some core fundamental beliefs that still unite us here. Like, look, stepping back for a second. Part of the reason we wanted to do this study, it's easy to feel down these days, okay, about the state of the country. That's a non-political statement, right? It's easy to feel down broadly. I think that's evident. We wanted to do something. Is there something here that can help lift perceptions up a little bit, right? And yeah, so we think that this does show some of that for sure, right? That we're not maybe as divided as some narratives and data would suggest. But look, there are some big issues, right? There are big issues. There are growing levels of effective polarization in this country, right, that show we have strong distrust of the other side. Our data suggests some of that too. Good, we're good up here, we're unified up here. You question the intents of other sides, we feel pretty divided, right? So this is a good news, bad news story, but we got to lift up the good news. That's the idea.
Mike, just, we do have a few people with their hands raised. So I don't know if you want to get to that. We also have a few people in the chat.
Let's look at our time. Why don't we go, let's go a couple more in the chat, and then we'll get a live comment in here or two. Yeah, so what else is in the chat then?
This was someone posted this a few minutes ago, talking about, do we need to get away and get beyond belief systems and rather focus on persons present to each other, kind of in the moment, personal relationships? So less about kind of what we believe and more relationship focused.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think that we did a little bit of that, and folks that follow FixUS will know about a previous study we did. We did a little bit that tried to get at that, which was just like, those basic, like, daily kind of activities and things we do and relational things, like, it showed like we all all really at the very core level are the same people. We all love our family, love our communities, all these kind of basic things that, like, you know, you share in common being a parent, for example, right? Like these kind of things, doesn't matter who you are. If you're a parent, like, you share some fundamental things in common that can really bridge some divides if you focus on that, right? Sports, I think, has been held up as another kind of thing like that. People kind of unify over this sort of personalized things they do in sports. So yeah, I agree with that too. I think it's an interesting idea to try and raise up too.
Someone wrote in the chat, I thought this was a really interesting observation. You know, we're about 4 months out from the midterm elections, and I think it's safe to say they'll be pretty divisive. And yet, they were asking, it builds off a previous question of what, you know, are we showing this data to political leaders? Because they say, you know, it's safe to assume that critical insights will be seen by members, and yet you don't hear the sort of language from those running for office that we see in this poll, in the findings that you just reviewed.
Yeah, well, it won't, you know, I think that part of this is convincing people there's a different way, right? I mean, it's like, I think that right now, any of the people on this call will not disagree with, you know, we have some incentives in our system that are built up to divide us, right? The incentives work to divide people. It's beneficial in many ways to do so in our political climate. So even when showing people things that could be unifying, those structural incentives in the system are built up to actually divide us. So, you know, the question is, when you get a critical mass of people that don't want it to be that way. And I think this data can help people show they're out there, but those incentives are still there too, right? To divide people. So I think we're going to do what we can to bring this data into people's, you know, put it in their hands so they can try to elevate, you know, patriotic appeals, right? Which would seem to be popular, right, amongst broad spectrum of the population. You know, but many people on this call know what we're up against there on the incentives of the system too.
Mike, building on the theme of the midterms coming up and voting, someone raised the fact that there's a story in the New York Times today. There's a poll between the New York Times and Siena that showed that a large population of younger Americans between 18 and 29-year-olds don't believe that voting makes a difference in how the government operates. And yet, in our poll, voting was seen as a patriotic action. So curious if you could dig deeper into the findings and what the breakdowns, you know, say, given the narrative we're hearing in the press.
Good suggestion. You know, I think that, to be clear, one of the things we're doing on the qualitative side is, like, we're going to probe people on, and we're going to recruit our samples intentionally this way, of getting people that answered certain questions one way, certain questions another way, and kind of being able to probe them on that, right? And so, yeah, you're raising some interesting ones there, whoever made that comment about differences between people. You know, that last slide, people don't feel heard in the system, right? They don't feel heard at all. They're still voting, right? They're still doing that. What are other aspects that we think we can do to make people feel heard in the system? That's what we want to understand, because that's obviously a thing that's unifying. People don't feel heard in our current system. They think it's patriotic to vote. That's great, right? But people obviously aren't feeling heard in the system. So we want to probe at that for sure. I acknowledge something else I saw pop up in the chat. People said, talking about people bringing groups together. How many people are on here? We have hundreds of people here, but it's the that we should do this and hook ups and bring people together to talk. We do that, right? We're not doing it for today's session. We want to get a bunch of people on in a chat forum to get folks in, but we do other sessions. We're going to do more on this. We're going to bring people together in group discussions to talk about these issues and design exercises with our partners to do so, to bring people together in person, actually in person, and also over Zoom to do so.
There was a talk about, or there was an observation about the fact that we all recognize that we're polarized and that this is a really harmful trajectory for our country. But yet, was there anything in the poll that indicated that people are willing to address it? So not just recognizing it, but working to address it.
We have a data point that's not in the deck. Strong majorities of people believe that we need to have more conversations with people that we disagree with, right? those that are on the call that are part of the bridge building community will appreciate that stat and obviously share that sentiment. So I think the answer there is yes, right? I think that there's a yes, but, right? I mean, I think there's a yes that people, I think, want to do that. But there's a but that, like, look, there's some distrust there. We know that there's some distrust over the intentions of what people think of the other side, how they perceive the other side. So getting across that and getting their willingness to get together on that is a big challenge that many in the bridge building world are trying to address. And I certainly don't have the answer on that yet, but it's something that we're thinking a lot about and need all the ideas we can.
Well, it's interesting, while you were talking, someone just wrote in the chat, how do we get those with opposite positions in the same room to, have that conversation?
Ben, I think we're going to wrap it up. Maybe take one more comment or so from the chat here. I think this is great. It seems like the chat, not as many people raised their hand to get in live, which is fine. Chat was active. People wanted to get in, so that's good. If there's any, give us one or two if we can fit it in, Ben. If there's any more in the chat, then I'll wrap it up.
Well, I think one note I have gotten from people outside of the chat is if they want to share these findings, where can they find them? Where can they dig deeper and learn more about them?
FixUsNow.org. Okay. You can go to FixUsNow.org. That's where you will find a report that has the data and more on our website. So go to FixUsNow.org. That's where you can find it. That's where you can find it in the form. You can share it as well.
My colleague Andrew just put it into the link to that into the chat. One question we keep getting a lot of these is, talking about the dialogues. There are a number of groups who are creating, dialogues for people to deal with or to meet and address each other who may disagree. Are we partnering in terms of future polls with other groups like No Labels, Braver Angels, or if so, what do we see as kind of the way forward using this data?
Yeah, the short answer to that is yes. That's what I was alluding to earlier when I said, as we're doing another round of this and get some more qualitative understanding of how people articulate these differences and levels of agreement, we are working with partners. You mentioned two fantastic groups that we know well. We're going to work with partners to apply this in forms that they use as well. That's exactly what we want to try and do, and we're going to be looking to do that.
Right. I just want to remind everybody, like Mike said, if you want to learn more about this poll, if you want to dig into it, dig deeper, share it with your friends on social media, please feel free to do so. You can find it at FixUsNow.org.
Very good. Thank you, Ben, for facilitating this. Thanks, everybody, for joining on. Chat looked active. Lots of people commenting. It was exactly what we wanted. That was definitely the purpose of this, and lots of good ideas. And so what's the dress code for the event this afternoon? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what event it is. But my dress code in the office is very casual these days. Okay. But look, thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for joining on, as always. Someone asked if we'll be posting a recording of this event on the website. The answer to that is yes also. So you'll find that at fixusnow.org in the next day or two. So again, just thanks, everybody. Stay tuned. If anyone has more ideas, send them my way. I think you know where to get contact with me. So thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Take care.